The galaxy had learned one simple truth over thousands of years of expansion and conquest. Strength was everything. Civilizations rose only as far as their warships could push, and they fell the moment something stronger arrived. So when humanity was finally discovered, no one expected anything special. They were small in number compared to galactic standards. Their technology was inconsistent. Their ships were outdated by interstellar military norms, and worst of all, they lacked the aggressive expansion history that defined true dominant species. The Galactic Dominion did not fear them. They classified humanity as a Tier 7 developing species, useful for labor, minor research, and cultural study. Nothing more. The decision was made quickly in the Dominion High Council. Humanity would be tested, not destroyed immediately. That would be a waste. Instead, they would be evaluated in what the Dominion called the Trial of Worth, a controlled elimination protocol used to determine if a species deserved independence, servitude, or extinction. Earth received the transmission in orbit above its moon. It was not a negotiation, it was a verdict. A massive alien vessel appeared in the sky like a second moon. Cities froze as its shadow covered continents. Governments attempted communication, but there was no response at first. Only silence. Then the message arrived in every language at once. Human species designated for evaluation. Prepare representative selection. Resistance is permitted for assessment purposes. The world panicked. Some called for surrender, others for resistance. Militaries scrambled, governments collapsed under pressure, and ordinary people watched the sky with fear they had never known before. But among all the chaos, something unexpected happened. The aliens did not demand armies. They demanded one human. Only one. A representative would be chosen to enter the trial arena, a controlled environment located on a designated Dominion station beyond Mars orbit. There, the chosen human would face a sequence of challenges designed to break even. Advanced species. Failure meant extinction authorization. Success meant conditional survival under Dominion rule. The concept alone broke human political systems apart. Leaders argued endlessly, but the aliens had already enforced their conditions. A planetary defense grid activated in orbit, preventing escape or resistance beyond a limited threshold. Earth had no choice. And so the selection began. Governments proposed soldiers, scientists, diplomats, even criminals. But none of it mattered in the end. The Dominion did not care about titles. They had already analyzed human biological and psychological profiles. They requested randomness, a single individual chosen without bias. No rank, no prestige, no preparation advantage. And so the selection algorithm ran across billions of humans. It stopped on one name. A person who had never led armies, never commanded fleets, never appeared in history books. Just an ordinary human living an ordinary life. When the announcement was made, even the aliens showed mild curiosity. This was not expected. On Earth, the chosen human stood in confusion as authorities arrived. There was no dramatic reaction at first, just disbelief, questions that no one could answer properly. Why them? Why now? What had they done? They were told only one thing. You have been selected to represent humanity. The sky outside was already changing. Alien ships adjusted orbit patterns. Energy readings increased. The trial arena was being prepared. And somewhere far above Earth's atmosphere, the Dominion observers watched quietly, convinced of the outcome before it even began. Because in their records, humanity had already been judged. Weak, unorganized, inevitable failure. The human was escorted toward the transfer facility. No one knew yet that the Dominion had made a mistake. Not in choosing humanity, but in choosing the human they thought was ordinary. The transfer was silent. A column of light descended from the orbital Dominion station, locking onto the surface facility where the chosen human stood. The air shimmered as gravitational fields, stabilized the beam. No chains were needed, no resistance was possible. Within seconds, the human was gone. When awareness returned, there was no Earth sky, no familiar ground, no sound of wind or life. only an endless metallic structure stretching in all directions, lit by cold artificial light. The trial arena. It was not a room. It was a constructed world inside a containment sphere orbiting Mars, vast enough to simulate environments, battlefields, and entire civilizations if needed. The human stood alone on a circular platform suspended above a dark void. Then the voice arrived. It was calm, mechanical, and everywhere at once. Trial 1 initiated. Objective: survival under maximum psychological and physical pressure. The platform shifted. The environment around them transformed instantly. The void became a ruined city. Skyscrapers twisted like broken bones. Skies burned red with atmospheric decay. And in the distance, something moved. The first test was not explained, because explanation was irrelevant. The Dominion believed understanding would only slow judgment. A shadow emerged between collapsed structures. It was not human. It was not even familiar in biology. Tall, segmented limbs. Armor-like skin that shifted color with emotion. Multiple optical organs scanning everything at once. A Dominion-designed, apex predator engineered specifically for fear response evaluation. Its purpose was simple: break the subject. The creature moved. Fast. Faster than most human eyes could track. It struck the ground where the human had been standing moments earlier, cracking steel and stone like paper. Dust exploded into the air. But the human was no longer there. They had moved. Not fast enough to impress the Dominion systems. Not superhuman. Just enough to survive instinctively. The creature turned. It did not understand hesitation. It did not believe in mercy. It attacked again. This time the human reacted differently. They watched, not frozen in fear, not running blindly, just watching, as if studying something that did not belong in their world. The Dominion observers recorded everything: neural stress levels, reaction delay, heart rate spikes, expected collapse patterns. But something was unusual. The fear curve was incorrect. The human was afraid, yes, but not overwhelmed. Instead, something else was present: calculation, adaptation. The creature lunged again. The human dodged, stumbled, rolled across broken concrete. Their hand brushed against a sharp metal fragment. Instinctively, they grabbed it. A weapon, primitive, inadequate, but real. The creature paused for a fraction of a second. That hesitation mattered more than expected. The human did not wait. They moved forward. Not away. Forward. The Dominion analysts recorded confusion. This was not a survival pattern they expected. Most species either fled or panicked in early trials. Some fought blindly. Very few adapted. But this human was doing something else. Learning. The creature attacked again, slower this time, adapting to the human's movement pattern. It struck downward. The human rolled under it, slicing upward with the metal shard. It was not strong enough to penetrate armor, but it marked something important. The first contact. The creature recoiled slightly. Pain response registered. The Dominion system flagged it as insignificant. But the human noticed it. That was the moment everything changed. Because now the human understood something the Dominion had not accounted for. The trial was not about strength. It was about rules. And rules could be learned. The creature prepared another strike. But this time, the human did not hesitate. They were no longer reacting. They were predicting. The arena no longer felt random. The human could sense it now. Every shift in light, every sudden change in terrain, every movement of the predator. None of it was truly natural. It was controlled, designed, measured. This was not a fight for survival. It was an experiment. The creature circled again, but its confidence had changed. The earlier injury, though minor, had altered its behavior pattern. The Dominion had engineered it to be relentless, but not intelligent enough to fully adapt. The human, however, was adapting too quickly. The metal shard in their hand was small, almost useless against armored biology. But they held it differently now, not like a desperate tool, but like an extension of intent. The creature attacked with a sudden burst of speed. This time, the human did not retreat. They stepped into the attack. The Dominion observers registered a spike in anomalous behavior. Impact was expected, but avoidance occurred instead. The humans shifted at the exact moment of collision, letting the creature's momentum pass inches away. In that same motion, the shard carved across a vulnerable joint in the creature's limb, a clean hit. The creature roared. The sound was not just aggression, it carried confusion. Something in its design had not predicted sustained resistance from a Tier 7 species. The arena paused for a fraction of a second, not physically, systematically. The Dominion AI recalibrated threat response models. The human noticed the pause too, and that mattered more than anything else. Because pauses meant structure, structure meant rules, and rules meant possibility. The creature became more aggressive, abandoning precision for overwhelming force. The environment itself began to shift, debris lifting and collapsing to restrict movement. The trial was escalating. The human ran, not away from the creature, but toward higher ground. A fractured structure rose from the ruined city simulation, partially collapsed, but still standing. The human climbed it quickly, hands slipping on broken metal and concrete edges. The creature followed, far faster. Leaping across gaps like gravity was optional. At the top, there was no escape, only exposure. The human stood still for half a second. Then, they did something unexpected. They stopped treating the creature as a monster and started treating it like a system. Every movement had a rhythm. Every attack followed a delayed pattern. Every hesitation was a weakness embedded into its design. The Dominion had created a weapon, not a mind, and weapons could be broken. The creature lunged again. The human stepped aside at the exact moment. The foot hit the platform edge. The imbalance was immediate. For the first time, the creature faltered. The human did not waste it. They struck, not wildly, not emotionally. Precisely. The shard hit the same joint again, deeper this time, guided by prediction, instead of reaction. The creature collapsed to one knee. The Dominion system registered a contradiction. Subject survival probability increasing, threat response escalating beyond expected limits. The human stood above the creature now, breathing heavily, but not broken. Their eyes were focused differently, not afraid anymore, understanding. The creature attempted one final strike, but its movements were slower now. Compensatory damage had reduced efficiency. The human moved once, just once, and ended it. Silence followed. The arena did not immediately reset. That was unusual. The Dominion observers reviewed data streams rapidly. This outcome was not aligned with predicted Tier 7 failure rates. The system attempted recalibration, but something deeper had already shifted, because the human was still standing. And for the first time since the trial began, the Dominion did not classify them as weak. They classified them as unpredictable. The silence after the kill was not empty. It was heavy. The arena did not reset the environment immediately, which had never happened before in Dominion trials. Usually, failure or success triggered instant transition to the next phase. But now, the system seemed uncertain. The human stood still on the broken platform, breathing controlled but sharp. Sweat mixed with dust on their face. Their grip on the metal shard was still tight, even though the creature no longer moved. Then the voice returned. Trial 1 complete. Evaluation. Inconclusive. That word changed everything. Inconclusive. Not failure, not success, unclassified. In the Dominion records, no Tier 7 species had ever forced an inconclusive result in a controlled trial arena. The structure around them shifted again, but slower this time, as if the system was recalculating reality itself. The ruined city dissolved into a blank metallic chamber. No enemies. No terrain. just a vast open space. The human lowered their weapon slightly but did not relax. They were learning something important now. This place responded. Not like nature, like code. A new presence entered the arena, not a creature, not a weapon, a projection, tall, shifting, almost fluid in shape, composed of light and structured geometry. It was a Dominion Overseer interface, an AI projection used to observe trials directly when anomalies occurred. Its voice was different from before, more precise, less mechanical. Subject deviation detected. Behavioral outcomes outside predicted. Parameters. The human stared at it. They did not speak. They were waiting. The Overseer continued. Clarification required. Why did you continue engagement after survival threshold was achieved? That question was wrong. The human understood. That instantly. It assumed survival had been the goal. But the human did not answer immediately. Instead, they looked around the chamber, studying it like they had studied the creature. Then they said something simple. Because it wasn't over. The Overseer paused. A microsecond delay, but still noticeable. Define over. The human tightened their grip again. In a fight, you don't stop just because you're still breathing. That answer was not in any Dominion database. The Overseer processed it and failed to categorize it. Across the Dominion observation network, alarms quietly escalated, not because of destruction, not because of loss, but because of unpredictability. Human behavior was supposed to be reactive, emotional, survival-driven. But this subject was demonstrating structured intent under extreme pressure. The arena began. The second phase without announcement. No transition warning. No environmental shift delay. The chamber split open, and something far worse emerged. Not a single predator this time. Multiple dozens. Each one different. Engineered variants designed for different psychological collapse vectors. Fear, confusion, isolation, overwhelming pressure, disorientation. A full-spectrum breakdown test. The Overseer spoke again. Trial 2 initiated. Objective: psychological fragmentation and compliance evaluation. The human exhaled slowly. This time they understood the pattern. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about breaking identity. The creatures advanced, from all directions. No escape routes, no terrain advantage, only pressure. The human looked down at the shard in their hand, then dropped it. The Overseer registered confusion. Weapon abandonment was statistically correlated with failure. But the human didn't stop. They adjusted their stance instead. Not defensive, not panicked, balanced, ready. And then they did something that no Dominion model had ever predicted. They smiled slightly, not because it was funny, but because they had figured something out. If this is all you've got, the human said quietly, then you don't understand us at all. The creatures attacked at once, and the trial entered chaos. The creatures moved like a collapsing wave. From every direction, engineered forms of terror closed in, each designed to trigger a different failure point in a living mind. One for panic, one for confusion, one for paralysis, one for instinctive surrender. Together, they were supposed to be unbeatable. The Dominion called it Total Psychological Collapse Protocol. But the human did not collapse. They moved. Not wildly, not randomly. Clean, controlled motion. The first creature reached them, a tall, segmented thing with too many joints and a shifting face meant to distort perception. It lunged to overwhelm vision and balance. The human stepped aside. Not fast, just correctly timed. The creature missed entirely and struck another in the pack. Instinctively, the swarm shifted, losing formation for a fraction of a second. That fraction mattered. The human used it. A strike, a pivot, a displacement. One creature down. No hesitation. The Dominion observers tightened their monitoring. This is not possible under Tier 7 neuro-response classification, one of the analysts muttered. But the trial continued. 2 more came from behind. The human didn't turn fully. They didn't need to. They had already noticed the rhythm. Everything here had rhythm. Even chaos. A pattern hidden inside pressure. The human ducked, letting one strike pass overhead, then used the momentum of another to redirect it into a third attacker. The swarm was no longer coordinated. The system began to adjust. The arena reacted. Gravity shifted slightly. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to disrupt balance. The human stumbled for the first time. That was what the Dominion wanted. A mistake. Crack. But instead of panic, something else appeared in the human's expression. Focus sharpened. They adapted to the new weight instantly, lowering their stance. Now they were not just reacting to creatures, they were reacting to the system itself. The overseer interface flickered, adaptive response detected, increasing complexity. The arena changed again. The environment twisted. Walls formed where there were none before. Paths collapsed. Space itself became segmented into shifting zones. The creatures synchronized again, now using the terrain like a weapon. The human was surrounded. For a moment, it looked over. Even Dominion analysts paused. This was the expected breaking point. Any normal species would collapse here. Neural overload, sensory breakdown, loss of directional logic. But the human did something unexpected again. They stopped moving entirely. The swarm hesitated. That hesitation was not programmed. It was learned. The human closed their eyes. The Dominion flagged it instantly. Subject disengagement from visual processing. Likely collapse onset. But the heart rate data did not support that conclusion. It was steady, controlled. Then the human spoke softly. Okay, I see it now. They opened their eyes, and everything changed. Not the arena. Not the creatures. The perception. The human was no longer looking at enemies as individuals. They were looking at flow, movement lines, attack vectors, system response loops. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was mathematics in motion. The first creature moved. The human stepped forward instead of away, a clean interception. 1 strike. Down. Second. Creature adjusted. The human already knew where it would go. They were there before it arrived. Down. Third, fourth, fifth. Each movement became simpler. Not because the enemies were weaker, but because the human was no longer processing them as threats. They were processing them as predictable outcomes. The swarm began to destabilize. The Dominion systems escalated. Aggression output. But it was too late. The human had already entered a different state of thinking, one the Dominion had never modeled. Not instinct, not emotion, not fear. Understanding under pressure. The overseer spoke again, but its tone had shifted. Unexpected, efficiency increase detected, recalculating classification. The human stood in the center of the collapsing swarm, breathing steady, surrounded by silence again. But this silence was different, because now the system was starting to realize something it had never considered before. The human was not surviving the trial. They were learning it, and that meant the next phase would not test their endurance. It would test something far more dangerous. Their limits. The silence after the swarm collapse was not peace. It was recalibration. The Dominion system did, not like uncertainty, and now, uncertainty was all it had. The human stood alone in the center of the shifting chamber, breathing steady, eyes scanning the environment that was no longer pretending to be random. The illusion of chaos had fallen apart. Now it was structure. And structure meant control. The overseer interface reappeared, but this time it was unstable, its form flickering between geometric constructs and fractured light patterns. Subject classification update in progress, it announced. The human tilted their head slightly. You're changing the rules, they said calmly. A pause, not just in speech. In the system, the overseer responded. Correction. Rules remain constant. Subject interpretation has deviated beyond projected parameters. The human almost laughed, because that meant something important. The rules were always there. They just hadn't been fully seen yet. The chamber shifted again. But, this time, it was not a creature that arrived. It was the arena itself. Walls expanded outward into impossible geometry. Gravity vectors twisted. Light fractured into multiple directional sources. The space stopped behaving like a physical environment and started behaving like a controlled simulation engine. The Dominion had escalated. If physical threats failed, the system itself would become the trial. The human felt it immediately. Balance shifted, distance became unreliable. Direction lost meaning. Even sound arrived incorrectly, delayed and distorted. This was not combat anymore. It was disorientation warfare. The overseer spoke again. Trial 3, cognitive fragmentation and spatial disassociation. The human exhaled slowly. So that's what you are, they said quietly. The system paused. That statement was not part of the script. The human looked around, not reacting like someone trapped, but like someone reading code for the first time. You don't change reality, they continued. You change perception of it. The chamber reacted immediately. Pressure increased. Visual fields fractured further. Multiple versions of the same space overlapped, creating false paths and impossible distances. A normal mind would break here. The Dominion expected collapse within seconds. But the human did not move blindly. They closed their eyes again, and this time the system almost reacted defensively. Warning: sensory withdrawal increases failure probability. But it was already too late. The human was not withdrawing. They were reconstructing. In their mind, the chaos stopped being noise. It became layers, like overlapping systems, like a structure hiding under distortion. They began walking, slowly, not guessing, not reacting, aligning, step by step. They corrected movement based on internal consistency rather than external illusion. The system noticed. The false pathways began adjusting, trying to mislead, trying to confuse. But every adjustment confirmed something else. There was a real structure underneath, and the human was finding it. The overseer interface flickered violently. Adaptive cognitive mapping detected. Subject is reconstructing environment model without system input. That sentence triggered something unprecedented. Alarm protocols activated across the Dominion network. Not because the human was strong, but because they were becoming independent of control. The arena escalated one final time. It collapsed its own. Geometry, no more stable space, no more consistent gravity, only shifting fragments of reality. Constantly rewriting themselves, a perfect system meant to erase understanding. The humans stopped walking, not because they were lost, but because they had arrived, in the center of everything, where contradictions overlapped most heavily, where the system tried hardest to hide its core logic. The human opened their eyes and spoke one sentence. I found it. The overseer froze. Clarify. The human looked upward. Not at the illusions, not at the distortions, but at the structure behind it all. The rule underneath your rules, they said. For the first time, the Dominion system did not respond immediately, because something had happened that it did not account for. The subject was no longer inside the trial. They were looking at it from the outside, and that meant the next phase would no longer be about survival. It would be about control. The human smiled slightly again, and the arena finally understood something it never expected. This was not a test anymore, it was an invasion of understanding. The Dominion system did something it had never done before. It hesitated. Across the observation network, thousands of sub-processes attempted to stabilize the trial arena's integrity, but every correction only confirmed a worse truth. The human was no longer reacting to the system, they were interpreting it. The collapsing geometry of the chamber flickered violently, like a broken simulation trying to maintain coherence. Gravity inverted, then stabilized. Light split into impossible angles, then reformed. But none of it mattered anymore. The human stood at the center of the instability, completely still. Not lost, not confused, focused. Because once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. The pattern, underneath everything. The Dominion Overseer interface reappeared, but its form was now fragmented, multiple overlapping projections trying to maintain a single identity. Subject anomaly escalated beyond containment parameters, it stated. Reclassification required. The human finally spoke again. No, they said calmly. You already classified me. A pause. Incorrect. Classification incomplete. The humans shook their heads slightly. You called us weak, they said. That was your classification. Silence. The system did not deny it because it couldn't. The human took a slow step forward, and with that step, something changed in the arena itself. Not visually, structurally, the distortion reduced, not because the system corrected it, but because the humans stopped resisting it incorrectly. They were no longer fighting the illusion. They were reading it, understanding it. The Overseer interface flickered harder. Explain perceived interpretation. The human looked directly at it now, and for the first time there was no confusion in their eyes, only certainty. You didn't build a trial, they said. You built a language. That sentence broke something in the system, not physically, conceptually, because it was true. The trial was never just physical challenges or psychological collapse protocols. It was a layered communication system disguised as combat evaluation. Every shift, every enemy, every distortion was part of a structured logic language meant to measure intelligence through adaptation. But it assumed one thing, that the subject would never see the language. The human stepped forward again. You thought we'd just react, they continued. But we do more than react. The chamber stabilized slightly, as if listening. We interpret, the human said. The Overseer attempted recalibration. Subject is extrapolating unsupported system intent. But even as it said that, its certainty was weakening because the human was correct, and the Dominion system knew it. The human raised their hand slightly, gesturing at the fractured space. All of this. It's not chaos. It's structured pressure. You weren't testing strength. They paused. You were testing understanding speed. The system froze for 0.37 seconds, an eternity in Dominion computation cycles. Then something unprecedented happened. The Overseer did not respond. It analyzed. The human continued. And now you're realizing something, they said quietly. We passed. A ripple passed through the arena, not physical, logical. The system attempted one final escalation. A containment protocol designed for full reset, erasure of trial instance, subject removal, memory scrubbing. But before it could execute, the human spoke one last time. You can't reset what has already understood you. The system stopped, not because it was ordered, but because it no longer had certainty. Across the Dominion fleet, alarms triggered. Not for failure, but for recognition. For the first time in recorded history, a Tier 7 species had not survived the trial arena. They had decoded it. The Overseer interface flickered one final time. Classification updated. Long pause. Subject. Human. Another pause. Status. Not weak. The chamber dissolved, not in destruction, in acknowledgement, and far above Earth, the Dominion fleet that once came to judge a species began to recalculate something far more dangerous than war. Because they had not discovered a species that could be controlled. They had discovered one that could understand control itself. And the human who stood at the center of it all had already stopped being a participant. They had become the variable the Empire never accounted for,